Let's finish session 61 talking about emotional balancing. Let's balance ourselves. In the first part of this session, we ended the last question with the balancing of the body and the necessities of the body, or the natural functions of the body, which I believe are very important because we often don't seem to pay attention to those needs of the body, and we have so many confusions around how we should approach our need for companionship or solitude once we get into a spiritual path. Also the need for love and sexuality. All of these things can become very confusing. So just to recap, that we know where we were coming from is that question. The question was about the natural functions of the body. And I talked about all of that stuff in that video, so I won't say much about it, but just to give you the brief notion that these are the natural functions of the body, and we need to pay attention to our particular needs, because not everybody, it's my belief, needs a specific, let's just say, speaking of sexuality, for example, everybody has a different need of sexuality, but it needs to be explored in its own particular case. So it's only about being mindful of it. And I also mentioned that I find it particularly interesting that it's very, very rare, but I love the exceptions to the rule sometimes with sexuality, which is the asexual people. And the asexual people is not to be confused with the people who have a trauma or do not want to engage in sexuality because they seem to have some sort of dislike, hatred, or whatever it is. So all of this is needed to be taken into consideration when we explore sexuality. Are we being honest with ourselves, and what do we desire? What do we want? What do we want to explore? The body is here to explore those things, and as we will find out here in this video, it is quite difficult to understand the reasons why we want things. It's actually not even quite difficult. It seems impossible, or nearly impossible, and not really necessary to know. So just to feel, basically. So feel what you need and find it out. Now, the other thing that I think was important in the last video, in that question 6, was how we can engage in balancing. And we will find that here too, the balancing between love and wisdom. And so I gave the example of somebody who is he has an aversion for being with other people, being around people. They get social anxiety. And so does that mean they really are seeking solitude? Well, they're seeking solitude only because they're afraid of companionship. And that just means that there is something there. You're not balanced if you have a fear or an anxiety around people. So you may want to look into what is the wisdom over love that is being. I mean, it could be both ways. It could be a love of self that is so great that you cannot be around other people, or it could be wisdom based, that you just want to be alone all the time and not be involved with other people. So you're closing your heart to other people. So it's hard to give just one direction. It really needs to be explored within the individual, but that's a possibility too. So love over wisdom. And the other thing is also possible of people who are always needing companionship. And this also is a natural function of the body, always needing people. So balance yourself within solitude. Why is it that you need people, and so on? So anyways, that is the brief summary of the last question, which I think was the most important in the previous video, And now we can start with Don asking the second question. Remember, these questions were asked by Jim, I believe, and Don is going to say something about the emotions, basically. They don't call it emotions, but let's get into it. Question 7, Don says, second question, the first question being the one that I just summarized, question 6 from the last video, says, could you give me an example of how feelings affect portions of the body and the sensations of the body? This is really important. So again, feelings, we may have a different understanding of feelings. I like to call it emotions, but they're basically the same thing. Ra says, it is nearly impossible to speak generally of these mechanics, for each entity of proper seniority has its own programming. Of the less aware entities, we may say that the connection will often seem random, as the higher self continues producing catalysts until a bias occurs. In each program, individual sensitivities are far more active, and as we have said, that catalyst not used fully by the mind and spirit is giving to the body. So first stop here, reminder from how entities develop. I'll give you an example of somebody who is highly developed and somebody who is basically a newbie in this reality. Somebody highly developed is the one that Ra is referring, as they explained that it is nearly impossible to speak generally of mechanisms of how the emotions affect the body, because it depends greatly on the programming of the individual. I mean, there are certain things that you can say are in essence the same, which is, say, the need for survival, but you can already see that there is shadings of survivability. What does it mean to survive to you? What does it mean to survive for me? Is it economically? Is it physically? Is it health? I mean, you can see how different these catalysts will start striking the entity depending on their programming. So I might have come, which I confess, most of my survivability is based on financials, which is, I think, the basic catalyst for all of us, but we all feel it differently. You know, some people are about health or about family. The family is what really matters, you know. So you can see just in one little aspect of catalyst and emotions, things that affect us in general, how it's very dependent. So it's almost like saying, how do people react to flowers? Well, it depends on so many things. So that is why Ra says it is nearly impossible. But part of my reminder or refresher that I wanted to give is when they say it depends on people's programming, right? They say that, and each entity of proper seniority has its own programming. That's I would say a good portion of us. The reminder here is for an entity to program its incarnation or its consequent incarnation after death is the opening of the heart, which is really the recognition of its own self as an infinite being or loving being. And that is really what opens the heart into the entity as it dies and goes into time-space for further programming, in this case being done by the entity itself. We have talked about this in different sessions, and this is just simply the evolution of the mind-body-spirit complex as it realizes its own heart and it realizes that it is one being. And this is not so of the less developed entities, or as Ra says, which is basically the same thing, the less aware entities. Less aware means that they're not aware of their heart, let's just say for simplicity. So by not being aware of their heart and their infinite beingness, then they need random catalysts, which the Logos provides. The Logos is the sun, and the sun provides random catalysts through its iterations in the earth, its different iterations of itself to provide a stimulus. This catalyst is a stimulus for the entity to grow. So it's going to encounter what seems to be random, but it's really just the Logos giving to see, you know, what do you like? What do you like? The darkness or the light, so to speak. And so This is the part that Ra refers as the less aware entities. We may say that the connection will often seem random as the higher self continues producing catalysts until a bias occurs. In each program individual, the bias being, of course, the direction in polarization. In each program individual, the sensitivities are far more active. Yes, each entity that has programmed its own incarnation here is a lot more sensitive, of course. As we have said, the catalyst not used fully by the mind and spirit is given to the body. So this is how it relates to the body. The catalyst being provided to the entity first as an experience in the mind, and it could be also obviously catalyst for the spirit, but when it's not processed, it goes to the body. So catalyst never goes unused. Catalyst is always used, whether it be by your mindful activity or the spiritual activity or the body activity. It's just that when it's not used, then it's given to the body in the form of what we call discomfort, disease, illness, and so on. This is why healing is referred to as the unblocking of lower energy centers, and simply just recognizing those things that you haven't balanced yet within yourself, thinking as a separate being. So as the separate being dissolves, then those illnesses related to the separate self or the identity of an ego, they will dissolve. However, those programmed, let's call it disabilities that we may have, remain because those were placed there by ourselves for the experience that we were to have. So whatever that may be will remain there. And I believed also, this is also, speaking of health and just conditions of the body, that this is also through the incarnation, the higher self makes modifications to the body. So if you lose a limb, for example, that is a way into accelerating your own learning experience here, or you lose an eye, or you become, insensitive to smells. A lot of people have had this. So, all of these modifications that happen, I think they are done on the go by the higher self to precipitate a learning, and that would be whatever it is for each entity. So again, it's nearly impossible to speak generally about these things, as Ra says. So we have more in this question. It's a really good one. Ra says, thus you may see in this entity the numbing of the arms and the hands, signifying this entity's failure to surrender to the loss of control over the life. Thus this drama is enacted in the physical distortion complex. In the questionnaire, we may see the desire not to be carrying the load it carries, given as physical manifestation of the soreness of those muscles for carrying used. That which is truly needed to be carried is a pre-incarnative responsibility, which seems highly inconvenient. Lastly, Ra says, in the case of the scribe, we see a weariness of and numbness of feelings ensuing from lack of using catalysts designed to sensitize this entity to quite significant influxes of unfamiliar distortion complexes of the mental, emotional, and spiritual level. My God, what a... I'm sorry. That was just a very strong sentence. They finish up saying, as the numbness removes itself from the higher or more responsive complexes, the bodily complex distortions will vanish. This is true also of the other examples. We would note at this time that the totally efficient use of catalysts upon your plane is extremely rare. Indeed it is. Okay, so the rest is just Ra talking about Carla first, when they say that she had a failure to surrender to the loss of control over the life. So does this mean that Carla was unable to surrender to the loss of control over life to death? I don't think so. I think it's more over the current situations of life, as Carla actually admitted in her book 5 comments. where she said that she wanted to give so much to this contact, and she couldn't accept the fact that she had a very frail body, that she had a very weak body. And so that means that she couldn't surrender to the loss of control. She wanted to control that. She wanted to control her body into being able to give more. This is all part of her martyr syndrome that she also confessed and Ra talked about. So I believe this is what Ra means. How does that translate into numbing of the arms and the hands? I don't know. I suppose this has a subjective quality to how, say, our lack of surrender, right, for the controlling aspect in our nature may manifest in different ways. It could be in the legs. It could be maybe, I don't know, in the mind somehow. Not the mind, but in our our way of living life physically. It just may be a weakness in the body in general. But I don't know. I'm just going random here. But whatever it is, I don't think just loss of control over the life is exactly hands and arms. It's just how it manifested there. You know, this is because I know that in Oriental medicine, which I'll probably mention a couple of times here, Oriental medicine, traditional medicine, it's not the allopathic system that we have now of just treating symptoms. They knew about the source of our discomfort. And so, for example, liver being anger, it's affected by your anger. It's also the stomach. And they just knew how to correct these diseases. So I don't know. I don't think that would be. But in any case, I don't know why I'm rambling on this. The point is that that's what Carla was feeling at that point. And so, yes, Ra says, see, when they say this drama is enacted in the physical distortion complex, meaning the body, it's enacted, it's manifested within the body, in the arms and hands. And then they go on to say that Don, he had okay, so they say, the desire not to be carrying the load it carries, given as physical manifestation. So Don had a desire not to be carrying the load. So for my Lord of the Rings nerds out there, you know how Frodo had a very heavy load with the ring, with the one ring, and he felt that he had a desire not to be carrying that load until Gandalf sort of says in Moria, that famous quote, which I love it, you know, all we need to do basically is, all we need to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us, not what we are given, all the load that we carry. And so Don had a similar distortion not to carry the load that he was carrying. And so that manifested as soreness of the muscles used for carrying, which is the shoulders, or this trapezius, which is usually the trapezius is this muscle that is always so tense, because we normally don't want to carry the load that the life is giving us. So we have a lot of soreness there, and this is why when people give you a massage there, they say, oh, you're very tense here. Of course, we're always tense. It's like flexing a muscle all day long. You're going to be tense, and you're going to develop that stiffness. And so it's interesting how our mind is, this may sound very energetic, metaphysic, and emotional and all of this, but notice when you're meditating and you relax, and you simply relax of a thought, suddenly some of your muscles may relax as well. So you can see this happening all the time within the body. I will explore a little bit more of this when it comes to the emotions, as they will talk about it. But yeah, that's what Ra is saying. That which is truly needed to be carried is a pre-incarnative responsibility which seems highly inconvenient. That is about Don. Don had a responsibility, he planned a responsibility pre-incarnation that now it seemed highly inconvenient to him. What it was, I can't tell, but clearly Don was involved in some really deep work here with the Confederation from the beginning. I mean, he heard his call since the 50s, I think, or late 40s. So he was, whatever it was, I can't say. Then they go on to Jim in that one sentence that was brutal. Hard to say what this means, but let's just reread it. In the case of Jim, the scribe, we see the weariness and numbness of feelings ensuing from lack of using catalysts designed to sensitize this entity to quite significant influxes of unfamiliar distortion complexes of the mental, emotional, and spiritual level. So he had let's just dissect it, shall we? The weirdness and numbness of feelings came out. He had a weirdness and numbness of feelings. Okay, so he wasn't very sensitive to the feelings and had a weirdness there in his feelings that came out from the lack of using a catalyst that was designed to sensitize him to quite significant influxes. So a lot of influxes of unfamiliar distortion complexes. What would that mean? I don't know. Of the mental, emotional, and spiritual level. So Jim had planned quite significant influxes to sensitize himself to a lot of influxes of unfamiliar distortion complexes of the mental, emotional, and spiritual level. So Catalyst was designed to sensitize him in the mental, emotional, and spiritual level, and he was just not using the catalyst. So Ra says that as the numbness removes itself from the higher or more responsive complexes, the bodily complex distortion will vanish. This is highly indicative of how we process catalyst by the mind, and then it goes down to the body. You see, we first perceive everything through the mind, and so the body is the creature of the mind. So how we perceive catalyst in our lives will manifest in the body by any means, and this is also pre-incarnative, of course. So the body is again a manifestation of the mind. So as the numbness removes itself from the higher or more responsive complexes, meaning the energy centers, if I can read this correctly, then by you using the catalyst up here in your mind and your spirit, right, emotional, mental, emotional, and spiritual level, then the bodily complex distortions will vanish. That's healing, my friends. That is healing. So how we choose to process our catalyst will result in whatever manifestation of the body would be. That would be further distortion, disease, illness, or the opposite, which is what we call healing, just an alleviation of those distortions, loads, and so on. Ra says this is true also for the other examples, meaning Carla and Don. We would note at this time that the totally efficient use of catalyst upon your plane is extremely rare. Yes, of course. I think everybody has had, I would even say the Buddha and Jesus had some catalyst that they didn't process. So I don't think that's even necessary. It's just part of the veiled mind in our illusion, as Ra says. So yeah, so this is how we deal with emotions. Now, I believe we're going to explore this further in other questions, but first, Don is going to say, could you tell me how you are able to give us information like this with respect to the first distortion or law of confusion? It's a good question. Ra says, each of those is already aware of this information. Any other reader may extract the heart of meaning from this discussion without interest as to the examples' sources. If each was not fully aware of these answers, we could not speak. It is interesting that in many of your queries you ask for confirmation rather than information. This is acceptable to us. That last part, so cute. Alright, so Don says, how can you tell us all of this stuff in relationship to the law of free will or Confucian? And Ra says that you were all already aware of this. Anybody else would just extract the heart of the meaning like we just did. That's exactly what they're talking. They're talking about us. Ra is talking about us. How cool. If each was not fully aware of these answers, we could not speak. Yes, they were fully aware. And I'll say something about this shortly. And then they say that it's interesting that in many of your queries you ask for confirmation rather than information. If I could read my etymology here, I find something interesting that first Ra is saying that you ask for confirmation. Confirmation means that you already know it, so you just want validation. Okay, somebody to tell you, yes, you're right, you know it. And confirmation in Spanish, I know this, the confirmation comes, I'm sure, from French from Latin. Latin with con means with you. So in Spanish, when you say conmigo, it means with me. Con, with. So confirmation with formation, let's say. I know the etymology is there, like it's within you, rather than information, which means in, getting in. So taken in formation, which is how you get informed. You don't get informed by something you already knew. So this is what Ra is saying, like you would rather confirm your knowledge than to get new knowledge. And this is acceptable to us, says Ra, which is fine. I thought that was cute. Anyhow, the part that I want to emphasize here is how did Don, Carla, and Jim know all of this? And seemingly they didn't know it this way. I love it when I work with people and I tell them, you know, we're having this conversation and this dialogue, and I point out to something that they're seeing. They know it, but they don't want to, they actually don't want to see it. They know it, but they don't want to see it. And this is all of us. Sometimes we just look at something when we explore a feeling or something inside us. Speaking of emotions, you know, you have a strong emotion and you know why you have this emotion, but you don't want to see it. This is the work, you know, the shadow work of going into those feelings that are speaking to you, but we just don't want to see it, you know. And it's funny when, like I said, when you're working with somebody and you can see it in them, you know that they're just hiding it. The answers that they give, the evasions, and just how they elude the question or the answer to the question. Strong resistance there. Oh, I felt it myself so many times that the more you explore it within yourself, the easier it is to see it in other people, so you can help them. And it's really interesting. So that's, I think, what is Ra referring here to, is that everybody was fully aware of all of this stuff. They just wouldn't admit it. And admitting it is just putting it, you know, into a pattern and saying, okay, yes, I admit this is true. This is what's affecting me. This is what's making me angry all the time. This is why when my husband leaves the dishes in the sink, then I get angry, because my father used to yell at me all the time when there were, you know, dishes there, or you know, my mother or my brother used to make me do the dishes, and now I feel. So you start weaving, you know, the patterns that create your emotion, and suddenly, you know, it's not an issue anymore, because you just see the futility into bringing all of this old drama that we have into our beingness. And this is how the emotion itself, when it's not dealt as a catalyst, because you need to just forgive all of that, and then you get into the process of saying, oh, well, if I can deal with this, then that's fine. It doesn't affect me anymore. The emotion doesn't come, and the emotion is not given to the body anymore. You don't affect your body this way, so you create some sort of disease. So this is how it all works together. It's a fascinating study. Unfortunately, we don't have it in our system of medicine because we treat symptoms. But I digress. I go back to the line of questions that Don had in question 9 and says, this brings out the point of the purpose for the physical incarnation, I believe, and that is to reach a conviction through your own thought processes as to a solution to problems and understandings in a totally unbiased or totally free situation with no proof at all or anything that you would consider proof. Proof being a very poor word in itself. Can you expand on my concept? I do believe proof is a very bad word here. Don was right. So Ross says, your opinion is an eloquent one, although somewhat confused in its connections between the freedom expressed by subjective knowing and the freedom expressed by subjective acceptance. There is a significant distinction between the two. Oh, this is beautiful. They continue and say, this is not a dimension of knowing, meaning third density. Even subjectively, due to the lack of overview of cosmic and other importance which affect each and every situation which produces catalyst. The subjective acceptance of that which is at the moment and the finding of love within that moment is the greater freedom. That known as subjective knowing without proof is, in some degree, a poor friend, for there will be anomalies no matter how much information is garnered, due to the distortions which form third density. This is, if you want to understand yourself within the veil and in, obviously, third density, this paragraph is so powerful. So first, Don is saying that the purpose of physical incarnation, knowing all of this, knowing that there are emotions that are coming through because of the catalyst that we have programmed and that we need to accept and process and so on, then, it's a good point. Yes, and he says that the point of this is to reach a conviction through your own thought processes, which would mean simply meditation, in the sense of actually mindful meditation, not mindless meditation, which is, that's a poor word as well, because mindless, we think it's just like, oh, you're mindless, you're stupid or something. Mindless means pure consciousness, in my book at least. So mindful meditation is just consider everything from a point of view of pure consciousness. So looking at the mind from pure consciousness and not looking at the mind from another aspect of the mind, which is really where we live in. We live in constant ego identity of mind separation for identity. And so that is to reach a conviction through your own thought processes, which I would call mindful meditation, as to a solution to problems and understanding, meaning solutions to our problems of apparent problems and understandings in a totally unbiased. This is where Ra has a little the refinement understandings. They don't like that word here. In a totally unbiased or totally free, keywords, yes, unbiased and totally free situation with no proof at all or anything that you would consider proof. This calls like faith. Don is talking about faith here, I believe. Proof being a very poor word in itself. I would have used the word faith. Can you expand on this? Because you see, when you accept and understand something without proof, that is faith. That is faith in that what you're doing because it feels right. Then it is the right thing. That is faith. So Ra says that first they're going to make a distinction, huge one. It is the connection between freedom expressed by subjective knowing. Okay, subjective knowing. That is what we believe to be true. We know how much that is on quicksand. That's a castle built on quicksand. With quicksand. Subjective knowing is always changing. So it's impossible. That is impossible. So there is this distinction, huge distinction, between subjective knowing what we believe and the freedom expressed by subjective acceptance. Oh, it's huge. It's huge. If you can't see the difference, I hope I can make a remark here that is enlightening for you. There is a significant distinction between the two, and we will explore that. Ra emphasizes that this is not the dimension of knowing. Third density is not a dimension of knowing, even subjectively, due to the lack of overview of cosmic and other importance which affect each and every situation which produces catalysts. We are completely unaware of all the influences that we have from cosmic and other importings, which can be spiritual guides, whatever. It could be the sun, anything. We are completely ignorant of the workings of the universe, and all we see is just light, gamma rays, and X-rays, and the rest of radio waves, and so on. This is just a tiny, 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 tiny spectrum of light. There is so much more. This is the metaphysical part of it. And so we are not aware of any of this, so we can't understand how all of this is working together. It's like trying to understand how a computer works just by looking at a still image. And even a video, you can't. I mean, you can understand that there is some processing, that there is some video rendering and so on, but you don't understand what's going on just by looking at that. You have to go deeper into all the workings and all the intricacies of how technology works and how do we get there and so on. So this is the I'm going to say the prize, but I think it's just the liberty. Oh my God, I just feel so much free from knowing that I can't know, from understanding that I can't understand. Because you see, when we live in a world where here we're very wisdom oriented in this planet, which means highly unbalanced in terms of the ego. And please don't confuse the word wisdom with ego. It's just that ego is exacerbated by the need of wisdom and lack of love. And so we think that we need to understand everything. Look at science. Science always feels comfortable saying, oh, we know everything already. This is exactly what religion used to say in the past. We know everything already. We know that God made this and made that, and so we understand everything. Well, that subjective knowing proved to be wrong. Just like science has been proven to be wrong all the time, and actually science forgot that the whole idea of science is to be proven wrong, so you can find more ways to explain the universe. And this is more of an art than a science. And so there's a reason why not long ago, probably 100 years ago or less, we used to call scientific instruments philosophical instruments, because they are a way to explain the universe. It's not greater or lesser than another philosophical point of view. Any other philosophy of life, they're all acceptable. It's only when we start getting a little fanatic and zealots with our own beliefs that we get into this. And so subjective knowing is not possible here. Even subjective knowing is not possible. So scientific people, I'm sorry. I was one of you for over 25 years. I was into the whole thing of we know everything, and that which we don't know, we are meant never to know. That is bullshit, if you excuse my language, but that is. We are meant only to experience life and rejoice in it. Things we will understand a little bit more as we evolve, as we have over time, but we will never know exactly how it is, because otherwise we would lose the veil, and guess what? We're not of this dimension anymore. So it's like once you see all the poker hands, then the game is over. You can't guess while you know. And that is the whole purpose of this. So subjective acceptance, on the other hand, of that which is at the moment and the finding of love within that moment is the greater freedom. Let me explain this part. As opposed to subjective knowing, which I already dissected, the subjective acceptance of that which is at the moment, meaning whatever it is at this moment, I'm talking to a camera, I need to accept this. I mean, I'm doing it naturally because I'm enjoying it. As you can see my joy here talking about this. Just accepting that which is in the moment, subjective, because it's not like, oh, if he accepts it that way, then I should accept it this way. No, it's a subjective. You are your own universe. How can I explain this without getting carried over? You see, you are a microverse. You have 7 chakras. Does that look similar to you? I mean, if you are a child and you look at your hands and you see your parent has hands as well, and then you see you have a body and a head, and you say, oh, they have a body and a head, that means that I am, a smaller iteration of him or her. Well, in the same way, we can look at the universe having 7 densities, and we having 7 subdensities. Doesn't that mean that we have a micro universe here, and we're processing everything? We are evolving our own experiences. The creator that we are is evolving all our experiences that used to be of survival all the way up to unity. Aren't we doing the same thing? We are repeating the same pattern, right? Of evolution, of evolving the soul. This is the evolution of the soul, right? And so when you look at the external world, which is just like a Russian doll, it's just a bigger version of yourself, all you're doing is accepting that which is without, which is yourself as well, and accepting it and finding, the love in the moment. That is what Ra is saying here. This is the subjective acceptance of your own universe. The way you perceive reality is pure and beautiful. Every one of us, even those who are into the negative path, which we seem in third density to criticize and say, well, that's not a fun path, you shouldn't be doing all of this. Even those, they have a beautiful way of enjoying this universe. They are the creator as well. And so finding that love within that moment is the greater freedom, because you're not subjected to anything. You're simply subjective to your own capacity of acceptance, heart, openness. Acceptance is the quality of the heart. Your heart is infinite. That means that you have infinite love or acceptance within you. That gives you the greater freedom, or what I would even dare to say, infinite freedom. The capacity of accepting and loving the moment, I should remark. So, Ra continues and says that known as the subjective knowing without proof is in some degree a poor friend, for there will be anomalies no matter how much information is garnered due to the distortions which form third density. And so, you see, Ra interprets this subjective knowing without proof. Maybe I interpret it differently with faith. But maybe what I would read here is that subjective knowing without proof could be also said to be, you see, like I mentioned, there is no way to say, oh, I know this perfectly well, even without proof. So, for example, I am right now, I have an understanding. Okay, I just have a feeling that I understand my own pure consciousness. But to hold on to this is, an understanding without proof. I cannot prove to you or anybody or even myself that I know it because of this and that. But I know that this is going to be subject to change, and I am willing to undergo those changes because usually they are enlightening. It's only when we when we hold on to beliefs, to knowledge, to understanding, that we get into trouble because we feel like, oh, I was wrong. No, you weren't wrong. You were never right in the first place. So you can't be wrong. You can't be right. There is no right or wrong. There is just how you perceive it. Or like looking at a piece of art and saying, oh, I understand that piece of art. No, I mean, the fact that you can see it and say, oh, I get it, it's fine. Years later, as you learn in life and you see it again, you say, wow, I don't understand what the hands meant there, in that position. I understand a little bit more. Or I understand it in a different way. So subjective knowing without proof is, to some degree, says Ra, a poor friend. Because there will always be anomalies, no matter how much information is garnered, due to the distortions of third density, which is the veil. You will never understand that. So, I think I hammer the point very well here. At least in the distinction between subjective knowing, what we think we know, finally, and if everything is subject to change, like the Buddha said in Anitya, impermanence, if everything is and will change, how can we know anything for sure, basically? Whereas if we can accept everything, we have a greater capacity from our hearts rather than our minds or the intellectual mind, because the heart is simply accepting everything. Isn't that a truer freedom than thinking that we know something? I believe so. And so, as an intellectual being myself, I find comfort in knowing that my heart is really the only key to navigating this reality without having too much friction, or too many resistances. Resistances? Is that a plural form of resistance? Let's go to question 10, where Don says, okay, the third question I have here is, could you give examples of bodily polarity? Ra says, very succinct, within the body there are many polarities which relate to the balancing of the energy centers of the various bodies of the unmanifested entity. It is well to explore these polarities for work in healing. Each entity is, of course, a potential polarized portion of another self. So, very quickly here, I think that's a very broad answer. Question, or a potential broad answer from a big question. But Rod just says it pretty briefly, and I think we can extrapolate a lot here. Examples of polarity within the body. I can think of many things. The homeostasis, for example, is a way of understanding balance and polarity, whatever that may be. Stress, body temperature, hormones, all of these things relate to the body, and those are polarities. When there is an exacerbation of one or the other, then the body is in balance. So I think this is what Ross says. Within the body, there are many polarities which relate to the balancing of the energy centers of the various bodies. So we're talking about the balancing of energy centers of the various bodies of the unmanifested entity. So the unmanifested entity, again, is that portion that desires to be manifested here, and the various body pertaining to that are related to the energy centers which are being developed or activated, if you will, energized, potentiated, whatever you want to call it, just energizing more. Yeah, energizing more the energy centers. So these manifest as these various bodies manifest, and they need balancing, of course, as they manifest, depending on how activated your energy centers are, whatever they may be. So the more you activate your heart, then obviously the more balance it would need. The more you activate your wisdom or energize your wisdom, then you will need more balancing in that regard too. So all of these things are polarities within the energy centers. It is well to explore these polarities for work and healing, of course, because the unbalanced self is the one that is prone to what we call unhealthy existence or beingness. Each entity is, of course, a potential polarized portion of an other self. Yes, that is what we're here for. We're always, the possibility is potential. Okay, not quite, but there is a potential polarized portion of another self. One of the things that is easy to explain here is electromagnetic attraction. And I'm talking about entities, people, when they are attracted. You've seen somebody, if you're into people sexually, you've seen people, or even intellectually, it doesn't have to be sexual, but mostly we see it sexually. We relate it to a relationship that you feel attracted. I have continued to have this in my life. I feel attracted to people for reasons I don't understand. And recently I was attracted to one of my Japanese friends, and she was, there was something, I was just really attracted to her. And I realized recently in our conversation, I just went to visit her just a couple of days ago, actually. And I, at first I couldn't understand what this attraction was for, but I understood that it was because, well, guess what? She was a philosopher, and she was, of course, into all of the Eastern philosophy. So, I understand why now. Why would I be attracted to you? Intellectually attracted or philosophically attracted, whatever you want to call it. But that is, you see, that was in her signature, in her aura already. It was in mine as well. I was not conscious of it, but there was an attraction there. I just felt something as we spoke with each other. And we confused this with, physical attraction, because you want to be with a person. But nothing physically was really, there. There was no match. But there was, something. And so each entity is a potential polarized portion of another self. You feel this attraction. And so that is why we need other selves as mirrors to understand ourselves. So, question 11. Don says, it says here, it would seem the proper balancing exercises for all the sensations of the body would be some form of inactivity, such as meditation or contemplation. Is this correct? Ra says, this is largely incorrect. The balancing requires a meditative state in order for the work to be done. However, the balancing of sensation has to do with an analysis of the sensation with a special respect to any unbalanced leaning between the love and the wisdom, or the positive and the negative. Then whatever is lacking in the balanced sensation is, as in all balancing, allowed to come into the being after the sensation is remembered and recalled in such detail as to overwhelm the senses. Wow. Okay, so this... yes, brilliant. We have meditation here. And remember how I said mindless meditation and now mindful meditation? Well, mindless meditation would be inactivity of the mind. Mindless. Inactivity of the mind. Is that what Don said? Let's see. Inactivity. Well, I'm adding inactivity. You cannot have inactivity of consciousness. That is impossible. That is not possible. And this is how we arrive at non-duality, or the law of one. We realize that consciousness is an ever-present consciousness, awareness, knowing. It's impossible for you to escape consciousness. You are always conscious. That is the rule of the Creator. You are always conscious. So inactivity can only be a reference to the mind, right? So does he say? No, he says proper balancing exercises for all the sensations of the body would be some sort of inactivity, such as meditation or contemplation. And of course, Don knows already that meditation is not about sitting and ruminating thoughts, but rather, the exploring of that pure consciousness that has no thoughts, it has no qualities, it's just pure knowing. Just like light has no colors, it's just pure light. You can refract it into colors and so on, but that's not pure light. So mind is not pure consciousness, but it is made of consciousness, just like colors are made of light and are light. So it's a very key distinction that I actually teach in my Law of One / non-duality courses and my classes, my seminars, and so on. It's a very key distinction between mind and consciousness. But mindless meditation would be that. Achieving samadhi, for example, or remaining in samadhi is just that blissful sensation of being conscious. Whereas mindful meditation is what Ra is referring here when they say this is largely incorrect that you need meditation for balancing. Ra says, the balancing requires a meditative state, yes, from the point of the observer, in order for the work to be done. Clearly, if there is no activity of the mind, no work is being done. So you need to have the mind active in order to do work. That is just quite simple. I don't need to explain that. However, the balancing of sensation has to do with an analysis of the sensation with special respect to any unbalanced leaning between the love and the wisdom, or the positive and the negative. So the balancing of sensations, if you feel, for example, that let's say you're very much afraid of losing your job. You're afraid. You don't want to explore that possibility. All that's happening is that you are somehow not wanting to explore the possibility of losing your job. What would happen? Fear of death is the same thing. It's a fear of even exploring the possibility of you dying. What would happen? Explore it. Go through it. What would happen? Stop being afraid. Or that doesn't. That sounds very. sounds very human society right now. Stop doing this and that. No. Actually, exacerbate that fear. See what happens. This is where they say overwhelm the senses. Yes, right at the end. So let me just keep going. When they say, first, the sensation, with special respect, you analyze the sensation. The sensation of losing my job. It just brings something that I don't want to deal with. Well, look at the unbalanced leaning between the love and the wisdom, or the positive and the negative. So I love my job so much that I don't want to lose it. Well, you may lack some wisdom in saying that this is not everything that you are. You shouldn't love something and be highly polarized into something. Invest yourself into that. So you may lack some wisdom. Or on the other side, you may be highly into wisdom, saying my job is the one that pays the most because I need to do this, and it's the one that it aligns more with my work and all of blah blah blah. You may have too much wisdom there and no love towards the possibility of you becoming something else, completely different, and exploring your own self. So you can see how this plays out in the person depending on its own makeup and in the same scenario. So you need to go in there and find out, why are you afraid? What is it that you're afraid of? Then whatever is lacking in the balanced sensation is, as in all balancing, allowed to come into the being after the sensation is remembered and recalled in such detail as to overwhelm the senses. So two ways in which I could see this happening. The first one is, say you're afraid of losing it, and so losing your job. Well, explore that possibility and go into it. Go really into it and see what happens. What would you lose? What would happen? And divest yourself from everything. Get naked with the scenario. And then you will see something else balance out. Something else will come up and say, well, this, I would feel this way. Well, start exploring that and start going through that process. What would I do with another job then? Or what would I do with another passion or something else that will ensue out of this? So this is why emotions are there, because they are telling us that we're not looking into one way. And so, as opposed to avoiding the sensation that comes out from the scenario of you, again, losing your job in this example, as opposed to repressing it, you go into it. You go deeply into it. Really go into it and see what happens. You will begin to see that just by exploring it, it just seems to balance out itself. And the other way would be to, as Ra says, the balancing exercise is to bring the opposite. What would happen? Not even what would happen. What is the opposite of whatever the emotion is? Instead of fear or whatever it is, it's just harmony. Just a sensation of peace, happiness. Enjoy that. Go through that. And know that you need one to have the other. This is the balancing exercise that I think is necessary for us to know and enjoy the fact that we are having these experiences, because they wouldn't exist without the other. And so if you actually go into that fearful part of yourself, you know that at the opposite side there is the other. And so there is a natural balance there. You don't need to seek either. It's just simply know that both exist, because just like two points in a stick, they are extremes opposed to each other, but they're both the stick. So let's go to question 12, where Don says, could you tell me why it is important for the appurtenance and other things to be so carefully aligned with respect to the instrument, and why just a small ruffle in the sheet by the instrument causes a problem with the reception of Ra? Ra says, we may attempt an explanation. This content is narrow band. This contact is narrow band. The instrument is highly sensitive. Thus we have good entry into it and can use it to an increasingly satisfactory level. However, the trance condition is, shall we say, not one which is without toll upon this instrument. Therefore, the area above the entrance into the physical complex of this instrument must be kept clear to avoid discomfort to the instrument, especially as it re-enters the body complex. So we're gonna get here, let me just, I will just read everything because we're going to explore different things. We know most of this, especially that ruffle in the cover, I think, of the pillow, how that affected. But we're entering into the Ra contact. Why there is all of this was needed, the rituals and the placement of the appurtenance of these, the whole arrangement that they had was necessary. This is all ritual for channeling, and so it's highly specific, which means that this was highly specific for them. It's not that this is how it needs to be for everybody. So please, big disclaimer there. And so Ra says here in the beginning, we have good entry into it because the instrument's very sensitive and they are a narrow band. It's like when you're trying to tune the radio, you're very far away and you need a very specific band of frequency in which you can tune it. So that's them. Ra is communicating from a very far away galaxy in a far away galaxy. No, it's just Ra is here. They're not far, and so they need to tune in that way. It's all about consciousness and the type of information that is being given. It is so narrow band that they need somebody very sensitive, like Carla. And not only Carla, they needed Don and Jim. So yeah, for the people that usually ask me, do you think we can channel Ra? I say, I don't know. We would have to analyze a lot how Don, Carla, and Jim were, not as individuals, but in their seeking in so many things. So I don't even want to do that. Okay, that was a validation. Don't look into that. It's not needed. We don't need it. We have everything here in ourselves. So looking outwards for answers is no longer current. It's obsolete, I think. Look inwards. Anyhow, however, the trance condition is not one which is without toll upon this instrument. Okay, yes, therefore the area above the entrance into the physical complex of this instrument must be kept clear to avoid discomfort to the instrument, especially as it re-enters the body complex. These were the appurtenances that were up here: the Bible, the chalice, and the incense, I believe, if I remember. So they needed to be well aligned, for Carla to feel comfortable. This all has to do with your mind and how you get into rituals, what they mean to you. And they meant a lot to Carla, so that's why they're important. Anyhow, they do continue and say, the appurtenance give to the instrument sensory input and mental visualization which aid in the entrance beginning, in the trance beginning. Of course, she would be entering this working by simply looking at it. Ra continues, the careful alignment of these is important for the energizing group in that it is a reminder to the support group that it is time for a working. So it has an effect on them too, and how they visualize the whole room and all the arrangements. They continue and say, the ritualistic behaviors are triggers for many energies of the support group. You may have noticed some more energy being used in workings as the number has increased due to the long-term shall we say, effect of such ritualistic actions. So this again just emphasizes how they would get into the workings. It's not the same to meditate in your room where you have all your stuff ready, your altar and so on, and meditate in a party. It's not the same setting. That doesn't mean that your consciousness is distracted. Your consciousness is always the same. So it is possible to not have any ritual or anything, but at the beginning, when you're getting into these workings, then you might want to have something very specialized where you can feel comfortable and you can feel that you're getting into working with meditation. In this case, I'm using an analogy with meditation, but an appropriate one because Carla was getting into a trance, and so she needed to feel safe that she was abandoning her body. So all of these things were important, even for the support group, which is Jim and Don in this case. And so Ra finally says this would not aid another group as it was designed for this particular system of mind-body-spirit complexes, and especially the instrument. There is enough energy transfer for one more long query. We do not wish to deplete this instrument. Speaking of that, yes. So yeah, this is the brief explanation as to why they need to be aligned and all of this stuff, because it's how they felt comfortable, doing a working or a session, and that all meant doing the ritual, what was called the lesser pentagram ritual, and also the circle of the one, which Ra gave. All of this was very helpful for them, and I'm assuming that Ra gave this to them because they felt that, I don't know if you have felt, look into yourself and see if by doing a specific exercise you felt like you were being energized. See, you never do this exercise, but all of a sudden when you do it, you say, wow, I feel energized. And I'm not talking about physical exercise, but just mental and getting into a state of mind. And you say, wow, by doing this, it's a ritual. Like I do it for my meditation. I feel very comfortable by going into a very specific pattern of remembering, all my aspects and so on. So it does help. So I believe Ra gave them the circle of the one because they knew that it would match their way of feeling comfortable doing a ritual. So I don't think it's something like, if some people resonate with a specific ritual, do it. I don't think it's necessary for everybody. It's only resonance. How do you feel about doing it? I am particularly not very interested in rituals, but other than what I do in meditation, which is just all within my mind, I don't do, I don't know, maybe it's just the way I am. I don't like lighting incense and putting things in a particular order and walking and doing, movements with my hands. That's just me. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It works for everybody in their own way. So highly dependent on the individual. So we will go to the last question that Ra asked here, and Don says, okay, then I will ask this one. Can you tell us the purpose of the frontal lobes of the brain and the conditions necessary for their activation? It's a good one. Ra says in question 13, the frontal lobes of the brain will, shall we say, have much more use in 4 density. The primary mental emotive condition of this large area of the so-called brain is joy, or love, in its creative sense. Thus, the energies which we have discussed in relationship to the pyramids, all of the healing, the learning, the building, and the energizing, are to be found in this area. This is the area tapped by the adept. This is the area which, working through the trunk and root of mind, makes contact with intelligent energy, and through this gateway, intelligent infinity. Woo! Beautiful. Okay, so frontal lobe activation. This is the mystical experience. This is the mystical living, which you sort of energize. You see, the frontal lobe is usually characterized in studies and research as being activated by the mystical experience. Like, say, Joe Dispenza has a lot of research in this. Now, I have my theory, which I will try to share here, if it makes sense. Joe Dispenza actually relates them to the 7 energy centers and how, he has chakra meditation and all of that good stuff. Great work by Joe Dispenza, by the way. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with his work, so I won't expand much on him. But highly recommended, of course, if you don't know. And so you see the frontal lobe activation. Most of us who were brought up in a system, and this is what Joe Dispenza actually works with, regular people who are trying to achieve these states of the mystical experience. Now, my theory is the following. You are, let's say, the undeveloped entity. That doesn't mean undeveloped spiritually, but undeveloped in the sense that hasn't, like me, for example. I'll give you my example. I was not into any of this stuff, any of spiritual development and so on, or mysticism. And I started developing an interest in all of this. Now, my mystical experiences at first were very intense, and they were, as it were, energy flowing through my energy centers that were very intense and very powerful. Over time, what I felt has become more common ground, let's say. That doesn't mean mundane in the sense of the word, that it's just ordinary, but ordinary in the sense that it's just common, for me to perceive the world as beautiful, as unity, as looking at things, because these concepts started to get, I'm a more mental guy than heart, but my mind opens the heart, whereas for some people the heart opens the mind, in the intellectual way, I mean. And so for these concepts have become more part of my own vision of life. So these frontal lobes are activated even more as you become more, let's say, unified with reality. Let's just put it that way. You stop accepting more, increasing tolerance, which is not a word I like too much, but increasing that acceptance. The more you accept yourself, then you see what they say, the primary mental emotive condition of this large area is joy or love. So the more you love, well, the more your primary mental condition or your primary mental emotive condition of the frontal lobes will be activated. Does that make sense? I mean, just from there you can take it. It makes sense when Ra says that this will be much more used in 4 density. Well, we are in 4 density already, so we have, I'm assuming they mean more the early 4 density as we divest ourselves from the physical body, which is the first stages of 4 density, which, by the way, we're doing now. And so it will be more relevant or more used in 4 density, because 4 density is, guess what? Love and understanding. That is the density of love. But if we open here as a human more our heart, acceptance of everything, which is called, again, tolerance. I don't like the word tolerance because it's indicating already that there is something intolerable. So I don't know, I have my quarrels with it. But it's just acceptance, unconditional acceptance of everything, just open-hearted. You will have a life more mystic, a mystic life, which is not reserved to those yogis and so on. Obviously, they live from their frontal lobe. They just live in full acceptance. And love it seems to be like a side effect of just living life from here. So, yeah, I think this makes sense in that connection that I'm making of love being the one that is the primary mental emotive condition of the frontal lobes is love in its creative sense. So artists are, of course, they work from this sense because they get into that zone. That doesn't mean that artists are mystics in and of themselves, but they work from this area. If anything, artists could use a little bit more wisdom, I would say. Not judging. I'm just saying that artists create from love. Everything that they make is love based. So they could use some balancing, possibly, okay? Just Throwing it out there. Just like scientists could use a little bit more love. You see what I mean? So the art of science. That is the perfect marriage. In any case, Ra says, for those of you who missed the pyramids already, I know one of you do. So yeah, I forgot the name of your username, but I know you love pyramids. So here you go. In relationship to the pyramids, these energies of healing, learning, building, and energizing are to be found in this area. That makes sense. As I have connected the pyramids to the energy centers, then you can see it here in the term of healing, which is lower energy centers, learning and building, which to me may be more heart mind, and then the energizing, which is the top of the pyramid, the apex, that the tip of the pyramid. This is the area which, working through the trunk, they're still talking about the frontal lobes. This is the area which, working through the trunk and root of mind, makes contact with intelligent energy. And through this gateway, intelligent infinity. So the frontal lobe being the heart mind. This is the heart mind that it's called in Chinese Shin, or if I remember correctly, Kokoro in Japanese, which is the heart mind, our processes of looking at the world from this connection of heart chakra and throat chakra. So when we do this work, right, this is the area tapped by the adept, because the adept is the one that is looking for intelligent energy. Working through the trunk and root of the mind. The trunk is your intuition, the root of the mind is your subconscious, makes contact with intelligent energy, indigo ray. Through this gateway, indigo ray, intelligent infinity. So this is how things work in the brain to manifest this contact with intelligent infinity. So this is the end of session 61. Conclusions. There are a couple of things I enjoy talking about here, which is the emotional part in this last part, where we talked about the frontal lobes and how they are related to our heart, our love, acceptance of everything, looking at the world as unity, and inviting wisdom into it, of course, because we need that. So balancing is really the key of our existence here, the balancing of everything that we see. And you see, when Ra said that the meditative state is needed, this is where I want to base my conclusions, because it's what I would recommend to everybody. It's the only thing that is needed. Actually, this is the reason why they say here at the end, the energies in relationship to the pyramids, they are all about healing, learning, building, and energizing. It's all here. We'll say in the frontal lobes, it's lighting up because it's feeling it, but it really is in our beingness to enter this meditative state for balancing those emotions that we're still feeling. They are a gift. It is a gift in and of itself that we have the capacity. And when I say we, I'm talking about the few people that watch this channel, and others, of course. But since you're here in this channel, there's just fewer of you. You see, all of this is it's needed for the development of the self. And so it is a privilege and a gift for you to be in knowledge of these exercises, these mechanics of how we work, or how the human is. And the meditative state is that place in which you can explore yourself with all your biases, your inclinations, your predispositions, and whatever it is. You explore yourself. That meditative state is one in which you're not in conflict with your own mind. That would be the mind reflecting upon itself, which is where the majority of philosophers actually reside in the Western world. They don't, few of them actually explore from the unconditional observing point that is consciousness. Pure consciousness, as I describe it in my vocabulary. So we have that gift, and through that gift is that we can perceive the imbalances that we have. And these imbalances can be brought up by the exercises that I explained here, and Ra explained, of course. And so this is the great work. This is the realization of the self. This is the creator knowing itself. That is you. You have all the tools. You have all the knowledge. You have all the energy centers. So just keep on doing it. With that, I come to the end of this session 61. Next session, I have no idea what we're going to talk about because I didn't take a peek into it. But I guarantee you is interesting stuff as usual. So I thank you as usual for watching. Thank you for being. Thank you for knowing yourself, basically, which you know already what I mean. I love you. I accept you in all your weirdness, in all your strange vicissitudes of life that have created you. Please know you are accepted, you are loved, and you're part of this reality, just like I am. The floor is, the sun is, we're one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in session 62.